So, Chris, interpretations. You have conveyed to me before a more fantastical interpretation of the Nephilim.
Right.
Where it's more like, you've seen the movie Noah
Yes.
with
Yeah.
Russell Crowe?
Yeah.
Where there's like weird tree rock monster things like from the Neverending Story.
Right.
Like those are like the Nephilim, I think.
Right, yeah.
Right? So why don't you go ahead and explain to me, because I've never asked you before, like for an actual like in-depth explanation of what you've held, or at least what you've been taught or have studied regarding the Nephilim, and I can't wait to hear it. Because,
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in the mainline interpretation I'm giving is one that seems to have been the Jewish one, at least until much more modern times. And it was actually the view of any fathers who spoke of it until Augustine.
That's interesting.
Augustine's the first one to come up because he didn't like this. He didn't understand how it could occur, like what the other people were saying. But
Okay.
I want to step back for a moment and go to the first rebellion, because this is kind of like a second fall in a sense. The angels that are involved here, however they're involved, that create whatever the Nephilim are. And go back to the primordial one in the garden. And the reason I want to bring that one up is because, again, there seems to be a connection. It's not one that you hear a lot today, but when you read the Talmud and such, when Satan comes in the form of the serpent to tempt Adam and Eve, and that fall, you have the whole story about the seed afterwards. The Satan, her seed will crush your head, but it actually outlines that there'll be a battle that Satan has seed, whatever that means, his children. So there's already this connection between that, and there does seem to be a sexual connection that we don't necessarily draw so closely anymore of what Satan is doing with Eve. And in fact, it's interesting.
Well, that's in the rabbinic text.
Right, in the rabbinic text.
Yeah.
But even in certain, I forget what cathedral it is, has a picture of Eve of Satan kind of wrapping himself around her in a very suggestive sense.
Yeah.
But either way, this idea of what it seems to be a theme that's running, that at least the early rabbis and the fathers saw, was that there's a competing, quote, seed for who's going to rule the earth. Will it be the seed of the fallen angel, or will it be the seed of God? And so we jump ahead all this time, whoever knows how long in between. And in between the event of the Nephilim in chapter 6 that you read and the story of the fall, we have Cain cast out, and supposedly idolatry begins with Cain, but at some point it connects with Shem's line as well, or not Shem, who replaced Abel, Seth's line, in the time of Enosh, is what Scripture says. So you kind of have this this setup that we've now introduced idolatry into the human race. Mm-hmm. You already have the fall and this kind of demonic thing of his progeny coming. Mm-hmm. And then we get to this weird story in chapter 6 of Genesis. And like you said, the Old Testament it actually mentions it in ways that we'd be surprised, I think. But generally speaking, you're right. There's no real big follow-up. And even a lot of the things, as you read through the story, they're weird, right? It's all they were before the flood and afterwards, and you're like,
and the heroes of old.
How did anything survive the flood?
Yeah,
but
they're the heroes of old.
And the term Nephilim is odd too, because it's we're not entirely sure what it means. There's a lot of different things, but it seems to be related to Hebrew terms for abortion, for miscarriage, which is Nephilim.
Whoa.
Yeah, so there's something that should not.
So that I didn't know.
Should not be, So anyway,
it's like something that shouldn't be. It's
right.
Like,
it's
not. It's unintended.
So at least what the basic gist is they tended to read the story quite literally, in the sense that angels came down, committed some sexual sin with human women, and the things born of this are the Nephilim, half human, half angelic, so to speak. beings, which now, in a sense, the line of human beings has now been corrupted by the line of the fallen angels.
This blows my mind,
So,
Chris.
so you have two competing
here's-
human races, in a sense, almost.
Yeah.
Because the Nephilim aren't necessarily they're powerful men. It talks about the men of renown and such. But
But here's why this blows my mind, though. On just a basic natural level, how can a species that is immaterial, like an angel, have intercourse with something that's material, and then an offspring is like a material offspring is a result?
yeah.
You
Well,
know?
that's part of the issue is until the 1300s, the definition of angel that we use so commonly today, used by Aquinas and such as being a completely immaterial being, was not held in the same way before. They believed that angels had to have a body because only God didn't have a body, was kind of the ancient thinking. So if you read, I think even your namesake, I think even
Saint
Justin
Justin?
Martyr mentions they have bodies of fire or bodies of something else.
He does? How did I not know that? That's
But,
so cool.
Yeah.
Shout out to St. Justin.
So in
His
in
feast
that-
day was just recently.
In that sense,
Yeah.
part of it's a change in our definition of spirit of the angels themselves.
Interesting.
Now, you can still go with it because Aquinas, even in the 13th century, talks about this, where he said the demon would possess like the woman or the man, and then have the seed put into them, and then they would possess the others. Like it was almost like the demon manipulated it, and all the parts, the egg and the semen, are all human, but it would manipulate its. I don't know. But actually, it's a question that Aquinas answers because he's asked, how can the succubi and incubi exist, which they still believed in, these sexual demons? How can they?
Where does he mention that?
When we were doing our original thing, I pulled that one out, so I'll have to look at what question it is. I think it's in the supplement to the Summa, if I'm right.
No way.
But
because it says they married any of them they chose. So why use the word married?
I don't think that's a correct. I think it actually says they took.
Yeah.
Whoever they
took to
chose.
bed.
Yeah.
Kinda,
So in effect, they didn't marry him, and it also seems to imply a polygamy. Like it's sort of distorted in every way of
So
what they've
interesting.
done.
It wasn't sanctified. Just kidding.
Well,
yeah. I mean, it's
just like later, that they get the angels here because of that get cast away. Although that's not actually described in the story. The flood is described, and the Nephilim's fate. The angelic fate we do hear about in 2 Peter and Jude, because it's clear he's alluding to this instance, because he talks about those angels who didn't keep to their own domain but went after unnatural flesh. And it's interesting because he connects the story in 2 Peter and Jude, both connect it to Sodom and Gomorrah, where there you have homosexuality, unnatural, and the other one is human. It's like almost like celestial bestiality, like like the angels and having sex with something of a different whole group.
So to sum up this interpretation, there's the first rebellion, which is the fall of the angels that we're all pretty much familiar with if you're in the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? A second rebellion occurred when angels took human women and impregnated them.
Yeah.
And then some sort of unnatural or I guess undesirable offspring came out of that, and the Bible calls them the Nephilim.
Yeah.
And then they end up becoming like the heroes of old. There's some sort of power
Right,
that
they're
they
powerful
have
because of their angelic.
That's so interesting.
Supposedly, from this perspective, and again, some people still hold this, others hold other things. Because there are these hybrid creatures, when the flood comes, it destroys their human part, but their angelic spirit lives on, but attached to this world. And that's why
Wait, where's that from?
that's the idea they came up with, because that's what a demon was understood by Judaism. A demon isn't the same, and even Paul seems to make the distinction between the demons and then you have the principalities, all the really powerful angels, and that's the whole reason under this thought that they want a body. Like the principalities and powers don't possess people; they don't need to. But the demons are looking for an experience they once had, so they've been around forever.
Addendum.
Yeah.
So then, from what I had summed up earlier, the Nephilim after the flood are separated. Their angel part and their human part is destroyed.
Right.
And their angel part lives on, and that is
those are the
demons.
Yeah.
That's trying to inhabit bodies and possess people, and it's so interesting.
And
That's
now
so
modern day Catholic exorcists, I've heard a couple of them say they've only added to that without entering into the question if that's what a demon is. But they do say an additional reason of why they want to take possession of bodies is to in some way either insult or to imitate the incarnation. So it adds another dimension to the whole thing.
So the original Nephilim in their original body did not possess a soul, like that body wasn't a human.
Well, it was
soul.
human. It just, whatever part of them was angelic, their spirit, their whatever it is, lives on. I mean, presumably, if that's true, then it'd be the same ones have been alive forever. There's no more, no less. There's just them. Now, maybe we'll talk about sometime soon is the Nephilim do continue to appear throughout the whole story of the Torah and the books of Judges, and so I'll mention that afterwards.
Where
we see, because I guess what they appear of, it talks them as as giant men,
like Goliath.
Right.
And
that's the thing is the Septuagint translates it as gigantes, the giants. So whether they're
not the Nephilim, they're the giants.
That's what they translate it as, and hence Goliath will be the end of the whole line of those, not directly Nephilim, but descended from them in some way.
That's why David
you have all these
is
words
so exalted.
like the Anakim, the Rephidim. You have all these words that come out.
Yeah.
So, looking at this question, the Nephilim, which we've talked about, these human angelic hybrids found in Genesis 6. Then the flood occurs, but even in chapter 6 that you read that one time, it said, they were there before the flood, comma, and afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it says, quote, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them.
So we move ahead all the way to the story of the Exodus. And it's interesting because after being freed from Israel on their journey to the Promised Land, we suddenly have little tidbits here and there of humans that have in some way still descended from those Nephilim. They clearly aren't as powerful as the Nephilim were. They're not fully whatever perhaps they're even fully human, but just
they have some sort of trait
or connected to the Nephilim. But in fact, one of the parts that a lot of people, both Christian or Jewish, Christian, or otherwise, one of the parts that disturbs them sometimes of the Old Testament is the harem laws of the Old Testament, to destroy these cities and everything in it. But what's interesting, on a closer reading, you'll see that the only cities God said to do that to were cities that had remnants of these particular people in it. In other words, He is literally wiping out the seed of these groups. So let me give you an example from Deuteronomy of what God tells Moses at this point. And this is Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 9 to 12. The Lord said to me, do not trouble the people of Moab, the descendants of Lot, or start a war against them. For I have given them this land, and I am not going to give you any of their land. A mighty race of giants called the Emim used to live here. They were as tall as the Anakim, another race of giants. Like the Anakim, they were also known as Rephaim, but the Moabites called them Emim. So all that stuff means there's all these like lineal lines descended from...
And all these cultures that identified
Right, the
these
Anakim,
things.
the Rephaim, the
These
Emim,
giants.
and all these people of the Middle Earth, or Middle Earth,
Middle Earth.
Middle East. Sorry, Middle
Ants.
East talked about them. He does the same thing later to the Ammonites. He says, "Also do not enter into the land of the Ammonites or trouble them, because I'm not going to give you their land. Their territory once belonged to the Rephaim, the name of the people who used to live there. They were as tall as the Anakim, they were many of them, and they were a mighty race. But the Lord destroyed them, and the Ammonites took their land and settled there." So you have him telling the people that Israel can't attack is because God has already done the same thing with them against his enemies, these Nephilim descended cultures.
Whoa.
And that's what Israel is now going to do in its part of the Middle East. And so he actually gives this command several times. So in chapter 19 of Deuteronomy, we have another kind of interesting thing. He says, where is it? Joshua. So in
Different
Joshua,
book?
yeah, in Joshua, at the beginning of Joshua's ministry, this is what God commissions Joshua to do. He says, "While Joshua was near Jericho, he saw the man standing in front of him suddenly holding a sword. Joshua went to him and asked, 'Are you one of our soldiers or the enemy?' 'Neither,' the man replied. 'I am here as the commander of the Lord's army.' Joshua threw himself on the ground and worshipped and said, 'I am your servant, sir. What do you wish us to do?' And he tells him to take his sandals off and stand on holy ground. So a lot of people have said it's the angel of the Lord. Some said it's Saint Michael, the man who portrays himself. But then they give this, this is the commandment that they actually tell Joshua here. And he says, "At this time Joshua went and destroyed the race of giants called the Anakim, who lived in the hill country, in Hebron, Debir, Anab, and in all the hill country of Judah and Israel. Joshua completely destroyed them and their cities. None of those Anakim were then left any more in the land of Israel. A few, however, were left because they fled to Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod, the Philistine cities from where Goliath will come later, the last of these strange beings.
Whoa.
And we're told just a few chapters later where it's given more specificity, where the tribe of Judah, so the ancestors of both King David and especially of Jesus himself, were told that Caleb, who was one of the only two spies who didn't fear entering the Holy Land, he said, Caleb drove the descendants of Anak, the Anakim, out of the city. It even names them, the clans of Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. From there, he went to attack the people who lived in Debir. So again, that's where they fled. And if you remember the original reason, those of you, when they send them to reconnoiter the land, remember why they're scared?
Yeah, because there's giants.
The people are giant.
Yeah.
They're so huge and stuff. And so you follow that through then, and then eventually it's literally Goliath and his brothers, because his brothers are mentioned as being killed by some of David's men later.
Interesting.
So in the books of Samuel, you have the defeat of Goliath, and so it's basically Israel has finally conquered all the last sort of remnants of these once powerful groups. So yeah, I mean, there's really, and I only gave a few. There's actually, I'll give you the handouts to look at too. But if you follow it through, it really is crazy. We've just given kind of bullet points of this ongoing war of the seeds, so to speak. I guess the ultimate culmination later will be, of course, the Antichrist, who is 100% human, right? It's the number of a man,
right?
But in the sense that they're the children of the serpent, because in some way they continue to, live out his desires, fulfill his will. So if you like what you saw, be sure to hit the like button.
And if you want more videos from me and brother Chris, make sure you hit subscribe to our channel and the bell notification so that you get alerted whenever we post a new video.